One of the things I do at my internship at the Alzheimer's Association is conduct a care consultation level 2 with clients. And I'll explain a little bit more about what they are, but you can read the goals of a CC2 on this slide. I was told that the CC2 is an evidence-based practice, and you saw the goals before. In this case, I used the activities of daily living check sheet, the stages of dementia check sheet, and primary care functioning check sheet to measure and keep track of how John, my actual client, was doing. The measurement we use for measuring the activities of daily living with a client is similar to the COTS, K-A-T-Z, Index of Independence of Activities of Daily Living scale, except on that scale there's only two categories, whether a person can do an activity independently or with assistance. The scale that we use actually measures three things: whether a person with dementia does something independently with a Q assist, or if they're a total assist. So you'll see the results from my client in the next slide about how well his mother Sandy was handling the activities of her daily living. Often this is a very emotional, interesting part of my care consultation, because people kind of can see on the paper how well the person is functioning, or in many cases not functioning, when they realize how many things they need assistance with or how many things they need a cue to do, that they're not really functioning independently at all. Well, before I dig into the chart, I guess I should explain a little bit more about the client and give you a little background information. John called the Alzheimer's Association seeking assistance dealing with his mother, Sandy. Sandy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I believe, about 5 years ago, when she was around 60 years old. And he was very upset at the condition of her house. He thought that it was filthy. She had bed bugs. She had 2 grandchildren living in the house that he said had wild parties. They were very loud. It was very chaotic. There was, I believe, 2 dogs. One is an unneutered pit bull, multiple cats. And he said his mother had bed bugs, so he wouldn't go in the house. And it was just in terrible condition. So he called he called Adult Protective Services, who said, there's nothing we can do. She's got running water, she's got electricity, there's food in the house. And so John was quite upset, but someone suggested then he call the Alzheimer's Association. Well, he didn't for a while, I guess. He reported that he just kind of gave up on the situation. And then John's sister, who is actually the mother of the 2 grandchildren that are living in the house, stole around $10,000 from his mother's bank account and used it on a drug binge. She was an addict, and she eventually ended up in rehab. But after that situation, I think John realized he needed help. So he called our 24-hour helpline, and I got the referral to call him to set up an appointment. So John came in with his wife for a care consultation, and what I do is I give them a tremendous amount of resources and information, and just most of it's kind of educational, some information about the different things that we provide at the Alzheimer's Association, but other things that are available in the community to help someone in this situation. And so that is when I conducted the CC2 and actually charted the activities of daily living for his mother. So you can see on the chart, if you can see, I couldn't get it any bigger on my slide, but in October, John reported that his mother was doing 7 of these tasks independently. He said she was taking her medication, for instance, independently, that there was no issue with that. He said she needs a cue or assist for about 6 activities of daily living, but the only thing she needed a total assistance with was transportation. She no longer was able to drive, and one of her grandchildren actually had to drive her everywhere she went, or John would pick her up at her house. Now you look at January, and all of a sudden, when I did my follow-up call with John, he's reporting no independent activities of daily living. And that's quite a big change. I know from October to January, but even with someone with Alzheimer's, that's a huge drop or decline in their functioning. And so I had to really kind of figure out, especially when I charted it, what in the world is going on? I didn't quite understand how all of a sudden, she wasn't ill, she wasn't hospitalized, but all of a sudden she was a total assist on 6 different activities of daily living. And I'll explain what happened in just a minute. But when I did my follow-up call in February, all of a sudden you can see Sandy is got nothing she's doing independently, and she needs a cue or assist for 4 activities of daily living. But all of a sudden she's a total assist. That means someone has got to totally assist her, not just say, Mom, it's time to take a bath and kind of prompt it. She needs help bathing, she needs help toileting. I mean, there's just, or transferring from in and out of a chair, she's getting real unsteady. Now, after some probing, because I was starting to chart this and realized how big her decline had been, I started asking some questions. Well, I had mentioned before, maybe you remember, that John wouldn't step foot in his mother's house. So a lot of what he was reporting was, I want to say, kind of guesswork. He would peek in the windows, or he'd pick her up and take her to the doctors, but he wouldn't actually step foot in the house. Well, John's sister, the one that is the addict, left drug rehabilitation and started taking over full-time care of his mother sometime in January. And so she was reporting back to John. She actually was living in the house and giving a little bit more accurate kind of picture of how well Sandy was functioning. And she's saying, look, Mom's not taking a bath by herself. I'm doing everything. And so I think that's probably the biggest reason for all these changes, which, like I said, for someone with Alzheimer's, usually it's more of a slow, steady decline unless some other kind of medical situation happens or something. So I was able to chart that and kind of, get a better picture of what was going on. The next information I would gather from a client during a CC2 would be information about what stage of Alzheimer's disease or dementia the person is in. And on the scale we use, we just track early, middle, and late stage symptoms. The Alzheimer's website and many medical professionals actually kind of keep track of 7 different stages. So, like I mentioned in the last slide, we track the early, middle, and late stage symptoms of Alzheimer's with the client. And if this is, and I don't mean this in a callous way, if the person hasn't already broke down and started crying when I kind of went through the activities of daily living, often this is where they get kind of emotional when they realize that that their loved one is showing symptoms of, it's more often, they're surprised at how many middle stage symptoms. Oh, Mom was just diagnosed. It's like, well, your mom was diagnosed at mid-stage Alzheimer's. And it also is a little emotional because when I ask some questions about late stage, I think they finally start to realize this is a serious illness that has, progression. And this is the time when I do a lot of educating. So one thing that we ask as a first stage symptom, for instance, is social withdrawal. Oh, yes, Mom won't leave the house. Or hoarding or misplacing things. Oh, yeah, she does that. Resists medical care. And people are like, well, yes. And I think it sort of normalizes for people that this is a common symptom that other people have, because people aren't getting educating themselves. They don't know a lot about this disease. So they're kind of, I want to say, surprised or maybe even relieved that other people have these symptoms and this is a known symptom. But when I start asking questions about, the mid-stage or even the late-stage care, so for instance, is your mom unable to feed herself? Well, of course she can feed herself. Why wouldn't she? And it's sort of challenging because I don't think people have any concept of what the end stages of Alzheimer's looks like. So in this case, John, I don't think had any awareness that his mother was going to actually lose, if something else, if she didn't pass away from another condition, eventually with this disease, she was going to start to lose so many functions, and one of them was going to be bladder and bowel control. And that's why I said often they start really breaking down and crying, because I'm kind of showing them what their future looks like. And this is kind of a tricky spot. Often I take kind of a break. I go get them a nice glass of water. I make sure I have the tissues ready. But again, it's often just a chance for me to educate people. And I'm just shocked that I'm doing this and not a medical professional. The neurologist, the family doctor, all the multiple people that these people are seeing that have dementia, and the family members just have no clue that that these are the predictable, expected things that are going to happen with someone with Alzheimer's. And I think it's a lot of it's denial. A lot of it's just they can't face it. Some of it's just simply lack of education. I don't know who's to blame. Like I said, I'm shocked the medical professionals don't go through this a little bit more. But anyway, back to what I charted. In October, Sandy was, as John reported, only showing symptoms of early stage Alzheimer's. But just like in the other things I charted, in January was when the daughter moved in, and she all of a sudden, his mom is showing some late stage symptoms. She had completely lost bladder and bowel control. She was wearing adult diapers. And I think that John just didn't have a clue. Like I said, he wasn't going in the house. She was probably kind of hiding it, or the granddaughter that lived there, who was 19, was probably helping clean that up, or I'm not sure. Maybe she did have a decline. Maybe that was that dramatic. But like I said, for the same reasons as before, it was just somebody that was actually living in the house, someone actually taking over day-to-day caregiving is noticing more symptoms. So by February, you can see that she's showing a lot of middle stage symptoms. There's no more late stage symptoms reported. Those would be stuff like difficulty swallowing, unable to speak more than a few words, bedridden, can't walk. Sandy wasn't quite at that stage. The only two symptoms she had was the bowel and bladder control. So that was that. It was sort of, actually, when you chart it, kind of dramatic. One of the last things I do with the client is the primary care partner functioning scale. Again, this was I was told was an evidence-based scale, but I realized when I deconstructed it, it's really it asks some of the questions that you would see on a QIDS depression scale, and some of the questions you would find on a depression scale, and some actually on a suicide scale. And the problem I have with this is there's 19 questions, and I don't know what to do with the results. There's no guidelines like with a depression scale, where if the person answered yes to these questions, so many questions, you could kind of realize that they're depressed or mild or moderately depressed. But in this case, it's sort of guessing, like, gosh, they answered a lot of yes questions, but I don't really know what to do with the results. So I don't like this scale. I don't think it's a good idea, but I've met resistance trying to use any other kind of assessment tool. I would normally only ask the questions that are on this scale one time at the initial CC2. And if a client, for instance, showed a lot of stress or caregiver burden or depression symptoms, I might ask about those symptoms during a follow-up call, but I wouldn't normally administer this whole scale again. I did that for the purpose of this assignment. As you can see, John, from the results, John was, yes, answers would indicate depression or stress or maybe even some kind of suicidal thoughts. John actually, for the situation he was in, didn't answer yes to an awful lot of the questions the first time. In January, there was an increase in yes answers, which wasn't a great thing, but what had happened is he had just met with the Area Agency on Aging about an hour before I called, and he was very frustrated. He wasn't able to get the results he expected from them. He's not going to be able to get really much assistance for his mother. And I think he was really upset, and I probably was not the best time to give him this, ask him these questions, because he was really agitated. I mean, this was about an hour after they met with him. But in March, he showed a much improvement, a lot less yes answers, which I don't think so much was the result of the CC2 and the interventions and the follow-up calls and everything. I think it had more to do with he has given up full-time care for his mother, and his sister is taking care of everything. And I don't even think he's managing her money, which I think is a problem. Here are some of my references, and I know I kind of rushed through part of this, but I had to keep it down to 15 minutes to be able to post it. But there were some ethical questions and considerations I had about this situation. A recovering drug addict is now the full-time care